There's a certain kind of person who can walk into a nice restaurant, sit down at a clean table with a real cloth napkin, look at the menu and still feel somewhere deep in their chest like they don't quite belong there. Not because anyone said anything, not because anyone looked at them wrong, just this quiet internal hum, like some part of them is waiting to be found out. And the strange thing is they can't always explain it, because from the outside, everything looks fine. More than fine. They worked hard. They built something. The numbers in their account don't lie. And yet, that feeling doesn't leave. Most people would look at someone in that position and assume one of two things. Either they're ungrateful, too focused on what they had instead of appreciating what they've built, or they're anxious. Maybe they need therapy. Maybe they just need to relax. Maybe they're overthinking it. What almost no one says is this makes complete sense. What almost no one acknowledges is that the feeling isn't a malfunction. It isn't weakness. It isn't something to fix or push past or talk yourself out of. It's actually the most logical response imaginable given where they started. What we're really talking about here is what happens to people who grew up poor and now live in the middle class, who crossed an economic line that most people in their family never crossed, who did it without a guide, without a blueprint, sometimes without anyone around them who had done it before. This experience has a psychology to it that almost never gets discussed correctly. It gets flattened into inspiration, look how far they've come, or quietly dismissed as lingering insecurity. But there is so much more happening beneath the surface. And when you actually understand it, everything starts to make a different kind of sense. Let's start with the brain, because this is where it actually begins. When you grow up in an environment of financial scarcity where money disappears before the month ends, where the electricity gets shut off, where a single unexpected expense is a crisis, your nervous system learns something. It learns that resources are unreliable, that stability is temporary, that comfort, if it comes, doesn't stay. Neuroscientists studying early stress and adversity have found that prolonged exposure to unpredictable environments, especially in childhood, shapes the way the brain's threat detection systems develop. The amygdala, which processes fear and danger, becomes highly sensitized. The prefrontal cortex, which handles long-term reasoning and emotional regulation, has to work harder to override those threat signals. What this means in real life is not that someone is afraid. It means their system is always scanning, always doing a quiet background check on the environment, always asking, is this safe? Is this going to last? What happens if this goes away? You don't choose to do that. You don't even notice you're doing it. It becomes the default setting. So when that same person years later looks at a dinner bill and feels something tighten in their chest even when they can easily afford it, that isn't irrational. That is a nervous system that was trained over years of real experience to treat spending as risk, to treat comfort as something that needs to be earned repeatedly and never fully trusted. The brain doesn't automatically update when the bank balance does. The circuitry was laid down early, and early wiring is stubborn, not because people are weak, but because the brain is efficient. It doesn't discard what it spent years learning just because the external circumstances changed. This is why people who grew up poor but are now financially stable will sometimes hoard things they don't need, keep a pantry stocked like a storm is coming, feel guilty buying something that costs more than it should, save obsessively and still feel broke, flinch at full price anything. These aren't quirks. They're echoes, behavioral residue from a childhood where those instincts were not only reasonable, they were necessary. But the economics are only one layer of this. There's something else happening that is, in some ways, even harder to carry, and it has to do with belonging. When you grow up poor and then cross into the middle class, you don't just change your circumstances, you change your world. The language people use around you shifts. The assumptions they make about you shift. The things they reference, vacations they took as kids, schools they went to, the way they talk about money as something to be managed rather than survived. All of it signals a shared experience that you were not part of, and you become fluent in two languages. In a sense, you can move through middle-class spaces. You've learned the codes, but there are moments, small ones, quiet ones, where you feel the distance, where someone makes a casual remark about their childhood home or their family's summer cabin, and something in you goes still. Not with anger, just with the recognition that you are translating constantly. that you are always slightly outside the frame. Psychologists refer to this as class identity conflict, the internal dissonance that comes from occupying a social position that doesn't match the one you were formed in. And it runs deeper than most people realize, because identity isn't just about how we see ourselves. It's about where we feel we belong, where we feel permitted to exist without explanation. The cruelest part of this particular tension is that it doesn't resolve cleanly in either direction. Go back to where you grew up, and something has shifted there too. You notice things differently now. Some of what you once accepted as normal, you can see more clearly. And sometimes, the people you love most, the ones who are still there, sense the distance, even if no one names it, even if no one means for it to be there. So you're not fully at home in the world you moved into, and you're not fully at home in the world you came from. You exist in the space between two places that both feel, in different ways, like they're not quite yours. That is not a personality flaw. That is the lived experience of crossing a class boundary, something that the culture celebrates in the abstract and almost never actually supports in the particular. There's a specific pattern that tends to emerge in people who carry this kind of history, and it shows up not in the dramatic moments, but in the ordinary ones. It shows up when someone gets a promotion, and their first instinct isn't pride. It's a low-level dread that they'll somehow be exposed as not really deserving it. When they over-prepare for meetings, over-explain their credentials in rooms where no one asked, over-deliver on things that only required a moderate effort, when they work twice as hard as everyone around them and still leave the office wondering if it was enough. Psychologists have a name for this. Most people have heard it imposter syndrome. But what rarely gets said about imposter syndrome is that for people who grew up poor, it isn't just a confidence issue. It isn't simply low self-esteem dressed up in professional clothing. It's something structurally different. When you grew up in a world where resources were scarce and your position in any given situation felt contingent, where things could be taken away, where stability was never guaranteed, your nervous system learned to treat your place in any environment as provisional, not permanent, something to be re-earned repeatedly, just to maintain it. So in a professional setting, in a social setting, in any setting that feels like it belongs to a class of people, you weren't born into that old circuitry fires. And it whispers, quietly, but persistently, you got lucky. They'll figure it out. You don't actually belong here. That isn't low confidence. That is a survival pattern that once kept someone socially calibrated in an environment where misreading the room had real consequences. It's been displaced into a new context, but its origin was rational. Here's the part that almost never gets acknowledged. The same neural and psychological adaptations that cause the anxiety, the guilt, the hypervigilance around money and belonging, those same adaptations also produce something remarkable. People who grew up in scarcity and built their way into stability tend to carry a kind of resourcefulness that is genuinely rare. Not the motivational poster version of it, the real, quiet, unglamorous kind, the ability to solve problems with less, to stay functional under pressure that would paralyze someone who never had to develop that capacity, to read a room accurately, to anticipate problems before they arrive, to find what's workable in a situation rather than waiting for ideal conditions that may never come. Research in developmental psychology has long pointed to a phenomenon sometimes called post-traumatic growth. The idea that people who navigated genuine adversity in early life often develop capabilities that more sheltered development doesn't produce. This isn't to romanticize hardship. Hardship is not a gift. It doesn't owe anyone anything, and it takes far more than it gives. But it does, in some people, produce a particular kind of competence, a groundedness, an immunity to certain kinds of panic that others haven't been inoculated against. The person who grew up watching a parent stretch $40 across an entire week develops a relationship with constraint that someone who never faced that simply doesn't have. The person who learned early that safety was something you built, not something you inherited, tends to build things more carefully, more deliberately, with a greater awareness of what can go wrong because they've already seen it go wrong. That's not nothing. That's actually something quite rare. But here's the trade-off. And this is the part worth sitting with. The same hypervigilance that makes someone resourceful also makes it hard to rest. Genuinely rest. Not just take a day off, but actually let the guard down. Actually believe, in the body and not just the mind, that things are okay. That the floor won't disappear. That what has been built is real and not temporary. For many people who grew up poor, relaxation has a cost that doesn't exist for others. It can feel like carelessness, like tempting fate, like the moment you stop watching is exactly the moment something breaks. So they keep watching, they keep scanning, they keep preparing for a disruption that, statistically, may never come but that, experientially, always did. There's a quiet exhaustion in that. One that doesn't show up on any external measure of success. One that other people who grew up with more often can't see, and sometimes can't believe when they hear it described. That exhaustion is real. It deserves to be named, not managed away. What often happens too, is that this entire internal world gets kept private. Because somewhere along the way, the person learned that talking about where they came from in certain spaces reads as oversharing, or as an attempt to be seen as impressive for surviving it, or as something that makes the people around them uncomfortable. So they learn to hold it quietly, to let people assume whatever they assume, to perform belonging well enough that no one asks questions, and that performance, however effortless it looks, takes energy. Every room recalibrated, every reference translated, every small gap between their internal experience and the expected social script quietly managed. It's invisible labor, and it accumulates. None of this makes someone damaged. None of this is evidence that something went wrong with them. What it is evidence of how responsive human beings are to the conditions they're formed in. The mind doesn't grow in a vacuum. It grows in a specific place, under specific pressures, shaped by specific repeated experiences. And then it carries those adaptations forward, even into different circumstances, because that's what minds do. That's not pathology. That's biology. That's learning. The middle-class address doesn't erase the working-class nervous system, and it doesn't have to. The goal was never to become a different person. The goal, if there is one, is simply to understand why you are the way you are, to stop treating your own patterns as evidence of failure, to recognize that what you've built is real, that you are allowed to be here, and that the part of you still scanning for danger was once doing you a profound service, even if it doesn't need to work quite so hard anymore. You're not behind. You're not broken. You're not an imposter in the story of your own life. You're someone who learned to survive in one world and then had the harder, quieter task of learning to live in another. If something in this landed for you, if some part of this describes something you've felt but never quite had the words for, there's more worth understanding about the psychology underneath the surface of your life. The patterns that feel like personality. The reactions that feel like flaws. There's usually a story beneath them. And that story usually makes a great deal more sense than you've been told.